Well, as I said, the theme of the talk this morning was, I suppose, it's not really a sermon. So it's more like a sharing of what I heard at this mixed Bible study. And it was led by Reverend David Hall, who's the senior pastor. They're very fortunate there. They have one senior pastor, two assistant pastors, 12 elders and 12 deacons. I guess you need it when you've got that many people in your congregation. So David took this Bible study, and I was so impressed with it, I thought, wow, that's what I'd like to share. So there are 5 aspects of friendship that I picked up. He probably dealt with more than those, but these are the ones that struck with me. The first one was someone who cares for us, not what we have. Someone we know deeply, whom we trust completely. Someone who has our best interests at heart, who will always give us wise counsel, even when we don't want to hear it. Someone who has a strong moral compass and will not lead us astray. And someone who would sacrifice for us and for whom we would sacrifice. Now, it's unlikely when you think about those things that you have too many friends that fall into those categories, particularly someone who measures up in all 5 of them. Often nowadays, it seems to me, particularly with social media, that people measure their worth by the number of friends that they have. I've never ever got a friend through social media, but then I also haven't been unfriended, so I guess that's a bonus. But I would suggest that probably, I can't think of too many, maybe I could count them on one hand, who would measure up to these sorts of things. And then the other thing I think about is, would someone be able to say this about me? If I'm a friend of someone, can they say that about me? So let's have a look at the first one. Someone who cares for us, not what we have. And we go to Proverbs 14:20. As I said, we'll be jumping around in Proverbs a little bit. And some of these sayings are quite pithy, so we'll be dealing with a few of them. So the first one in Proverbs is 14:20. And of course, this relates to someone who cares for us, not what we have. The poor are shunned even by their neighbours, but the rich have many friends. And then go to 19:4. Wealth brings many friends, but a poor man's friends desert him. And then also verse 7. A poor man is shunned by all his relatives. How much more do his friends avoid him? Though he pursues them with pleading, they are nowhere to be found. Well, that seems to imply that sometimes friendship is based on our wealth or our influence and not our character. And I can recall a friend of mine, and he once had a very successful business, and it went bankrupt. And he was not a believer at that stage, and subsequently he came to our church in Canberra. And he was saying that it was the first time that he could ever recall that people accepted him and made friends of him for who he was and not what he had. Because he said so many of the people who he thought were friends, when his business went belly up, they weren't around anymore. So there's the first one that we need to think about, is someone who cares for us, not what we have. The second one is someone we know deeply and whom we trust completely. And here we go to Proverbs 18, so not so far away, and it's 24. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Now, That is, that's interesting because it talks about two different sorts of people. It talks about companions, maybe we could even say acquaintances, companions, and then it draws a distinction between a friend who sticks closer than a brother. So there really is two different sorts of folks, and maybe those social media folks are sort of companions or acquaintances, but are they so close a friend that they would stick through you through thick and thin? How well do you know them? How well do they know you? Now, a really good example of friendship is, of course, between David and Jonathan. If you go through to 1 Samuel, chapter 20, I'll just paraphrase some of the things that happened there. Now, you'll recall, of course, that Jonathan is the prince of the realm, the son of King Saul, and David has got, I guess, the population behind him because he's so successful in battle. And King Saul becomes really jealous because now David's getting the glory which he thinks is due to him. So the king invites David to a dinner at the palace, but David is very concerned about his safety because he thinks that probably the king at the very least will throw him into prison, but more likely will kill him. So he speaks to Jonathan and says, look, I'm a bit concerned about going along to this feast. How about we come up with a plan that you can alert me if it is going to be bad for me. So they come up with this plan that David won't attend the dinner. If anything goes wrong, he will be hiding out in the field behind a rock. And what will happen is that Jonathan will come out with his bow and arrow and he will shoot some arrows. If everything's okay, he'll shoot the arrows short of the rock, and then David will know things are fine. But if things are not looking good, he'll shoot the arrows beyond the rock, and then David will know that he needs to flee. Now we look at the level of their friendship in chapter 20, verse 16. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan and David reaffirmed his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. This was a quite remarkable friendship. And then I think Jeff, you might recall, has preached on how David later on, after Saul and Jonathan had died, he looked after Jonathan's son. So we can see here that what happened was that he didn't turn up at the feast for the first night, and King Saul was a bit miffed, but they had come up with a story. And then on the second night, he really did lose his cool. And we see that as we go down to verse 30. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, here's his son he's talking about, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die. Well, what did Jonathan do? He didn't do what you'd expect a son might do. Why should he be put to death, says Jonathan. What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. So he goes out into the field, and what he does, he shoots his arrows beyond the rock. And he says to the young page, I guess, who's there to correct his arrows, he says, go beyond the rock. And the secret words he uses tell David that his life is in jeopardy and he flees. So there's an incredible example of what true friendship is all about. These two men who loved each other as brothers, and they were true to each other. Okay, so that's someone whom we completely trust. Next one is someone who has our best interests at heart, who will give us wise counsel even it is uncomfortable to hear. And my dear Helen was very good at this. She said it was like having an opinion, and she would tell you what was in your best interest, whether you were a friend or not. But there you go. So here's someone who has our best interest at heart, and they give us information, counsel, even when it's uncomfortable. So Bible reading is Proverbs 13. Go back to 13. And it's in verse 20. Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong one. I've jumped to one. No wonder I can't find it. I went back to Samuel. Okay. So this is some wise sayings. He who walks with a wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. And then we go to Proverbs 27. I guess this is talking about who we knock around with. And we go to verse 6 and then verse 9. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. And then in verse 9, perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of one's friend springs from his earnest counsel. So obviously what we're looking for in a friend is someone who just doesn't flatter us, doesn't always tell us what we want to know, but sometimes tells us what we need to know. You don't want to go to university anymore because you can't get that. You have to have a safe space. Otherwise, someone might tell something that might hurt your feelings. So we don't need safe spaces. What we need is people who love us so much. They'll tell us when they can see that we're going down the wrong path, that we're going to make a fool of ourselves, or alternatively, we're going to make some disastrous decision. So we need someone that not only are we prepared to listen to them, but we're prepared to heed their advice. So that was someone who will tell us what we need to know, not necessarily what we want to hear. The next one is someone who has a strong moral compass and will not lead us astray. So we go to Proverbs 1. And we go and we read from verses 10 through to 16. My son, if sinners entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for someone's blood. Let's waylay some harmless soul. Let's swallow them alive like the grave, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, and we will share a common purse. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their path, for their feet rush into sin. They are swift to shed blood. And then we go to Proverbs 12 into verse 26. A righteous man is cautious in friendship, but the way of the wicked leads them astray. So basically it says if you run with a pack of people who are no good, and we saw the extreme in that first reading where they, I guess, wanting to waylay and rob someone, some innocent and helpless person. If you run with a pack like that, well, you're going to be like them. And then, as we see in the second one, in verse 26 there, you need to be very cautious about the people who you select as friends. Because if you hang out with bad folk, ipso facto, you're going to be one of the bad folk yourself. So there's someone we need to choose our friends cautiously. They need to be upright individuals, and they don't lead us astray. And indeed, they encourage us to stay on the path of righteousness. And then the final one is someone who would sacrifice for us and for whom we would sacrifice. Now we jump out of Proverbs here and we go to John. And we go to John chapter 15 and we read verses 12 through to 13. And this is the Lord speaking. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. You are my friends. If you do what I command, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. I can remember in Canberra, when I retired from the Air Force, I used to go into schools at Easter and Christmas and explain what the significance of the Christian message of Easter was and what the significance of the Christian message for Christmas was. And when we went in at Easter time, we were talking about, of course, the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. And so I would say to the little kids, and they weren't that little, I guess they were grade 6, 10 years old. And I'd say to them, we've just learned about Jesus Christ, about how he died for us. And then I would say, would you die for anyone? No way. They've just seen, how he died and what happened to him. No way were they going to do that. Or indeed die for someone, even if it wasn't so gruesome and harsh. But I said, well, I'm pretty sure that your parents would die for you. And I'm pretty sure I would die for my children and my grandchildren. But I wouldn't die for a stranger, someone I didn't know. And here was Jesus Christ who died for his enemies. So I asked them to think about that, that their parents in all likelihood would die for them. And here was Jesus Christ who died for strangers and sinners. So here we have this notion of, would you die for a friend? I mean, that's a big, big ask. I've got no doubt I'd die for my wife or my children or a grandchildren, but would I die for a friend? I'm not really sure, honestly. I might give up part of my lung or something, but put my whole life down, I'm not too sure. So, yeah, we have here an example of Jesus Christ who in fact died for us. And we're now pretty shortly going to come around the Lord's Supper and think deeply on what that meant and what it means for us. So think on these attributes, and I'll read them to you again. Someone who cares for us, not what we have. Someone we know deeply, whom we trust completely. Someone who has our best interests at heart, who will give us wise counsel, even if it's uncomfortable to hear. Someone who has a strong moral compass and will not lead us astray. Someone who would sacrifice for us and for whom we would sacrifice. So think on these. I think you're likely to agree with me that you have very, very few friends who match up to those 5 criteria. And I just go back to the song that we sung at the outset. What a friend we have in Jesus. And there's 3 lines I'll bring to your attention. The first one, what a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? take it to the Lord in prayer. I mean, he meets all the criteria perfectly, doesn't he, Jesus Christ? All those 5 criteria he satisfies perfectly. An important aside, and this is something that David Hall said at this mixed Bible study, and it's something that when you hear it, you think, of course, but a lot of people don't do it. As parents or grandparents, we cannot set out to be friends with our children and grandchildren. We are the adult in the room, and we need to set the example. We need to discipline them if needs be. But what a joy it will be if when they become adults, we count them as friends and they count us as friends. But think on that. How many parents maybe go astray because they try to create friends out of their children when what they're supposed to be is a father or a mother. And then there's another thing too. What a blessing it would be if our wife or our husband was one of our best friends. What a blessing. Okay, so on that little thought, that brings me to the end of that. But think on that. Think on those 5 things as we come around the table this morning, because in Jesus Christ, you have the perfect friend, and you also have a Lord